I never thought sharing a bunk bed at summer camp would change my life, but here I am, lying in the dark, listening to Reed breathe above me, wondering how everything got so complicated so fast. It started 3 weeks ago when I pulled into Camp Riverside for my summer job as a counsellor. I'd done this gig last year, loved working with the kids, loved being outdoors, loved the simplicity of it all. What I didn't expect was walking into the staff cabin and seeing Reed sitting on the top bunk, reading a book with his legs dangling over the edge, wearing a faded band shirt and these ridiculous bright orange socks. He looked up when I came in, smiled this easy smile and said, "Hey, looks like we're bunkmates." I remember thinking he had a nice smile. That was it. Just a nice smile. The first week was normal. We'd wake up early, grab coffee from the mess hall, wrangle our groups of hyperactive 12-year-olds through activities, collapse into our bunks at night exhausted. Reed was easy to be around. He was funny in this understated way, always making these quiet observations that would crack me up. Like when one of the kids insisted he'd seen Bigfoot by the lake, and Reed just nodded seriously and said, "Yeah, Steve comes around on Thursdays, he's pretty chill. We fell into a rhythm. I'd take the bottom bunk, he'd take the top. At night we'd talk for a while before falling asleep. Nothing deep at first, just the usual stuff. Where we went to school, what we were studying, complaints about the head counsellor who took everything way too seriously." Reed was studying environmental science, wanted to work in conservation. He talked about it with this genuine passion that made me actually care about watershed management, which is saying something. I started noticing small things. The way he'd run his hand through his hair when he was thinking. How he always gave the shy kids extra attention during activities. The fact that he drank his coffee black but put an absurd amount of honey in his tea. How he'd hum under his breath when he was reading. Normal observations, right? The kind of things you notice about anyone you're living in close quarters with. Except I wasn't noticing these things about anyone else. Just Reed. The second week, something shifted. We were doing the ropes course with our groups, and I was spotting this kid who was terrified of heights. Reed was on the platform above, helping kids across the bridge, and I looked up at exactly the moment he looked down. Our eyes met and he grinned at me. This full, genuine grin that made my stomach do this weird flip. I had to look away, told myself it was just the sun in my eyes or that I'd had too much coffee. That night, lying in my bunk, I could hear Reed moving around above me, getting settled. The whole frame would creak slightly whenever he shifted position. I'd never really thought about it before, but suddenly I was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. I could picture exactly how he was lying up there, probably on his side with his book, one leg bent, that little crease between his eyebrows he got when he was concentrating. "Adrian," he said suddenly, his voice floating down from above. "You still awake?" "Yeah," I said. "What's up? Do you think the kids actually learn anything here, or are we just glorified babysitters?" I smiled in the dark. Both, probably, but I think they learn stuff, like how to be away from home, how to try new things. "Yeah," he said. "I guess you're right." Pause. "I'm glad I got paired with you. Some of the other counsellors are kind of intense. You too," I said, and meant it more than I probably should have. After that, our nighttime conversations got longer, deeper. He told me about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, how he couldn't wait to leave but also missed it sometimes. I told him about my family, my 2 sisters who never let me get away with anything, my dad who thought my English major was impractical but supported me anyway. Reed asked questions like he actually cared about the answers. He remembered details from previous conversations. When I mentioned I was worried about a short story I was working on, he asked about it every few days, wanted to know how it was going. The third week we had a day off, and a bunch of counsellors decided to hike to the lake on the far side of camp. It was beautiful, this hidden spot surrounded by trees with water so clear you could see straight to the bottom. Everyone was jumping in, splashing around, being loud. Reed and I ended up sitting on this flat rock at the edge, our feet in the water, a little apart from the group. "This is perfect," Reed said, tilting his face up to the sun. "I could stay here forever." I looked at him, at the way the light caught his profile, the water droplets on his shoulders from where he'd splashed himself, and something in my chest tightened. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Perfect." He turned to look at me then, and for a second, maybe 2, we just looked at each other. There was something in his expression I couldn't read, something that made my heart start pounding. Then someone called his name. The moment broke, and he stood up to join the others in the water. I sat there, feet still dangling, trying to figure out what the hell was happening to me. I'd had crushes before. I'd dated girls in high school and college. But this felt different. This felt like standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and unavoidable. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk staring at the wooden slats above me, listening to Reed breathe. My mind was racing. I kept replaying moments from the past 3 weeks. The way my pulse jumped when he'd touched my shoulder to get my attention. How I'd started looking for him first thing every morning. The fact that I was now lying awake thinking about him instead of sleeping. I'd never really let myself think about guys this way. It's not that I was opposed to it in theory, I just never met anyone who made me question things, but Reed made me question everything. The attraction I felt was undeniable, and trying to ignore it was like trying to ignore gravity. The next morning I was exhausted and distracted. Reed noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked as we walked to breakfast. "You look like you didn't sleep." "Just thinking too much," I said, which was the truth. "About what?" I shrugged. "Everything. Nothing. You know how it is." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure something out but didn't push. Instead, he bumped his shoulder against mine and said, "Well, stop thinking so much, you're going to hurt yourself." I laughed despite everything, and we fell into step together. His hand brushed mine as we walked, and I swear it felt electric. I shoved my hands in my pockets. The days started blending together, but I was constantly aware of Reed, where he was, what he was doing, who he was talking to. When one of the other counsellors, this girl named Maya, started flirting with him pretty obviously, I felt this sharp twist of something I didn't want to name. Reed was friendly but didn't seem particularly interested, which made me feel relieved and then guilty for feeling relieved. We were lying in our bunks one night, about 4 weeks in, and Reed asked, "You ever have dreams that feel more real than being awake?" "Sometimes," I said. "Why?" "I don't know. I've been having these really vivid dreams lately. Can't always remember them when I wake up, but the feeling stays with me all day." "What kind of feeling?" He was quiet for a moment, like something's changing, like I'm figuring something out but I don't know what yet. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Yeah," I said, "I know that feeling. What do you dream about, Adrian?" The question hung in the air between us. I could have deflected, could have made a joke or given some vague answer. Instead, I found myself saying lately, "You." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear everything. The crickets outside, someone laughing in another cabin, my own blood rushing in my ears. Reed didn't move, didn't make a sound. I'd just blown up our entire friendship with 2 words and I couldn't take them back. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, Reed's voice came from above very quietly. "Me?" "Yeah," I said, because there was no point in backing down now. "You. What kind of dreams?" I closed my eyes, the kind that make me realise I've been lying to myself about a lot of things. Another long silence. Then I heard the bunk creak and suddenly Reed was climbing down the ladder. My eyes flew open. He was standing next to my bunk in his t-shirt and boxers, his hair messy, his expression serious and uncertain, and something else I was afraid to hope about. "Can I?" He gestured to the edge of my bunk. I nodded, scooting over to make room. He sat down, his hip against my thigh, and we were closer than we'd ever been. I could feel the warmth of him, smell his soap and sunscreen. "I dream about you too," he said, looking at his hands. "Have been for a while now. Thought I was going crazy." "You're not crazy," I said. "I've never," he paused, struggled with the words. "I've never felt this way about a guy before. Didn't think I would. But you, there's something about you that just..." He shook his head. "I can't stop thinking about you." "Reed," I started but didn't know how to finish. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and asked, "What do we do about this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm kind of terrified." "Me too," he said. And then he smiled. That same easy smile from the first day, but with something more behind it now. "But I'm also kind of excited." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and took my hand. His palm was warm, his fingers threading through mine like they belonged there. "This okay?" I squeezed his hand, my throat tight. More than okay. We sat there like that, holding hands in the dark, neither of us quite believing this was happening. Eventually Reed said, "I should probably go back up. We have to be up in like 5 hours." "I know," I said, but didn't let go of his hand. He laughed softly. "You're not making this easy." "Good," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. He stood up, but before climbing back to his bunk, he leaned down and pressed a quick kiss to my forehead. It was so gentle, so sweet, that I almost stopped breathing. "Sleep well, Adrian." "You too," I managed. I heard him climb back up, heard him settle in. My hand was still warm where he'd held it. My forehead was still tingling. I touched the spot where he'd kissed me, smiling like an idiot in the dark. The next morning was slightly awkward, both of us dancing around what had happened, sneaking glances at each other, but during afternoon free time, Reed found me behind the arts and crafts cabin where I'd gone to be alone for a minute. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself." "So," he said, leaning against the wall next to me. "Last night happened. It did. Any regrets?" I turned to look at him. "None." "You?" "Not even a little bit," he said, and the relief in his voice mirrored what I felt. "So what now?" I asked. He reached out and took my hand again, bolder in daylight. "Now we figure it out. Together. Together," I repeated, liking the sound of it. The last 2 weeks of camp were simultaneously the longest and shortest of my life. We kept things quiet around the other counsellors, not because we were ashamed, but because we wanted this thing between us to be ours for a while. But in private, in those late-night conversations and stolen moments, we were learning each other. I learned that Reed had been questioning his sexuality for a while, but had never met anyone who made him want to explore it. I learned that he was ticklish right below his ribs, and that he made this adorable snorting sound when he laughed really hard. I learned that he kissed like he was afraid I might disappear, gentle and intense all at once. Our first real kiss happened on a night hike we'd volunteered to lead. We'd gotten the kids back to their cabins and were walking back to ours when Reed grabbed my hand and pulled me off the path into the trees. The moon was bright enough to see by, and he backed me against a tree and kissed me properly for the first time. I'd been kissed before, but never like this. Never with this much want and tenderness combined. His hands cupped my face and I gripped his waist, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Reed said against my lips. "So why'd you wait?" I asked. "Had to make sure you wanted it too," he said. "Wanted to do this right." And I fell a little more in love with him right then, though I wasn't ready to say those words yet. We talked about what would happen after camp ended. Reed lived 3 hours away from my college town, which wasn't ideal but wasn't impossible. We both wanted to try, wanted to see where this could go. The thought of not seeing him every day was painful, but the thought of not trying at all was unbearable. On our last night, we lay in my bunk together, squeezed in tight, his arm around me, my head on his chest. The camp was quiet, everyone exhausted from the closing ceremony and saying goodbye to the kids. "I'm going to miss this," Reed said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Miss falling asleep knowing you're right here." "We'll figure it out," I said. 3 hours isn't that far." "I know. Still going to miss you, though." I tilted my head up to look at him. "You know what's crazy? 6 weeks ago I didn't know you existed. Now I can't imagine not knowing you." He kissed the top of my head. "I know exactly what you mean." "Reed," I said, my heart pounding, "I need to tell you something. Okay, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already fell. I don't know. I just know that this, us, it's real for me. Really real." He was quiet for a moment, and I started to panic that I'd said too much too soon. But then he shifted so we were face to face, his eyes serious and soft in the dim light filtering through the window. "Adrian, I'm already there. Already fell. Probably started falling that first week when you helped that kid who was homesick, sat with him for an hour just talking about his dog. You were so patient and kind, and I just thought, oh no, this guy is going to wreck me." I kissed him then, deep and slow, trying to pour everything I felt into it. When we finally broke apart, we were both smiling. "So what now?" I asked, echoing our conversation from weeks ago. "Now we do the long-distance thing. We visit each other. We call and text and make it work. And next summer, we both come back here. You want to come back? If you're here, then yeah, absolutely." We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and I woke up a few hours later to find Reed watching me in the early morning light. "Morning," I mumbled. "Morning," he said. "Just wanted to look at you for a minute." Memorize this. Sap, I said, but I was smiling. Your sap, he corrected. Yeah, I agreed. My sap. We packed up our stuff that morning, helped close down the camp, exchanged numbers and social media with the other counsellors. Maya caught me alone at one point and said, You and Reed, huh? I nodded, suddenly nervous about what she'd say. She just smiled and said, Good. You guys are cute together. Made me happy that it wasn't going to be this big, dramatic thing. Reed and I drove out of camp in our separate cars, but we pulled over at the entrance, both getting out for one more goodbye. He hugged me tight, his face buried in my neck. Drive safe, he said. Text me when you get home. You too. And Reed, this summer, it was everything. For me too, he said. See you in 2 weeks. We'd already planned our first visit. 2 weeks felt like forever, but also manageable. I kissed him once more, then forced myself to get back in my car and drive away. I watched him in my rearview mirror until I couldn't see him anymore. That was 3 months ago. Reed and I are still together, still figuring things out, still making it work. It's not always easy. Long distance is hard and we're both busy with school and sometimes we go days where we can barely talk. But then he'll send me a photo of something that reminded him of me. Or we'll video chat and talk for hours. Or I'll drive those 3 hours just to spend a weekend with him, and it's all worth it. Next summer we're both going back to Camp Riverside. We've already been hired. And yeah, we were requested to be bunkmates again, because it turns out that sharing a bunk bed with the right person can change everything. It can make you question things you thought you knew about yourself. It can make you braver than you thought possible. It can make you fall in love in the most unexpected, beautiful way. Sometimes Reed still asks me what I'm dreaming about, and I always tell him the truth. I'm dreaming about him, about us, about the future we're building together, one conversation, one visit, one moment at a time. And he doesn't go quiet anymore. He just smiles and says, Me too, always me too.